There we go. I see the message that the recording has started.
All right,
So,
and share my screen.
yep.
And try and do it in presentation mode. See how that works today. Oh.
Not so well.
Not too
So
well.
is great.
Wow.
Ooh.
Okay. All right. I guess I got some PC work to do.
There we go. We can work off this.
And I'll try and blow it up a little. Get a
All
little
right.
bit better.
Okay, then. All right, we'll do the call to order then, and I will call this meeting of the Tier 1 Physical Regionalization Working Group to order. It is 10:10 on September 18th, 2025. I'm Barb Neal. We are recording the meeting, and the recording will be posted to the task force webpage following the meeting. We'll start with our usual roll call. Paul, if you could acknowledge your presence.
I am present.
All right. And as we noted before the recording start, Michael Wright is not here. But we do have, of course, our project management partners, Rick, Dom, and Elizabeth from Televate, and Chris Pedotti has joined us from VSP. So, Paul, I think we do have some changes to the agenda. First would be we're going to defer approval of the minutes until a meeting when Michael can be here. And I think the rest of the agenda looks okay, though we discussed not taking any actions
Right.
in this meeting.
We may not dive as deep into some of these discussions as we would if the group was all here.
Okay. So with that said, we'll remove the next agenda item, which is approval of the minutes from the agenda, and move on to or back to Dom to take us through the discussion for today.
All right. Thank you. And as you mentioned, this is a meeting of the Tier 1 Physical Regionalization Working Group. We have a minor update to our schedule here, just showing where we are currently and indicating the governance working group has been extended until the end of this month. This indicates our the participants in this Tier 1 working group. And our objective is to develop preliminary recommendations and the priorities in support of the physical regionalization plan. We had a few action items from the initial meeting, and that was the first one was regarding 13 communication centers that were identified for regionalization or for absorption into others based on the options presented by MCP. So I do have a list of those. And we'll talk about those in future slides. Action item 2 was regarding unless self-funded and subject to state policy. That was referred to a couple of places in the report, and MCP was referring to that based on the various options. They recommend regionalizing several dispatch centers, a different number in each of the options. But they also indicate that if a specific dispatch center chooses to continue to operate, they would have the option to do so, but they would have to be funded, self-funded, so they wouldn't receive any funding from the state, and they would have to agree to follow the policies and procedures recommended by the state. So that's what that reference means. The other action item was for Chris Pedotti to send out his notes and observations, which he did on the 10th. So I think we're good on action items.
Okay.
Until we assign some more today. This is a review.
So
What we
can I ask
discussed.
a clarification, Don? I didn't get a
Yes,
chance to talk
sir.
to you about it. Go back to slide 6.
Oh,
So
yeah.
when on the number 2 item that you mentioned, when they talk about funding from the state, are we, as a task force, and obviously this is a working group's opinion, but isn't it our intention, or I don't want to put words in anybody's mouth, but there is a governance structure, and there's going to be a governance committee and board that makes these decisions. They're already sanctioned by the government, right? So when we say that state, it sounds like, it's coming, everything is coming from the state, but when we're looking at our own board of directors really guiding this. And I just wanted to, we don't know what funding, if funding will come, but
Right. We don't know that yet, but and I think that's probably more accurate to term it that way. No funding from the governance board or the governance organization, as we want
yeah, I
to
want to,
describe it.
Right.
yeah, I think it's, it would be wiser to do that, because it still sounds like, the state is forcing these, when we are creating a governance, what we're recommending is a governance body that develops, these requirements, and has, basically sanctioned, is supported by the legislature to have that authority.
Right. Agreed.
I don't mean to make a big deal out of it, but
No,
Yeah,
good
I
point.
mean,
Thank you.
you're right. I mean, I think it would be to follow I can't read exactly what that says, but rather than the criteria established by the state, the criteria established by the appropriate governing authority, which ultimately will be an arm of the state, but it sounds a little less big brotherish if you
yeah,
don't
Right.
refer to it
that,
as the
Right.
state.
Yeah.
that was my thinking behind that too.
Yeah.
Since
Happy
this is
to happy to change that wording.
Thank you,
I'll
Don.
make those adjustments. Continuing on, we discussed the key findings. We discussed this last time regarding the 37 communication centers currently, of course, in operation according to MCP's criteria for regionalization. 13 of the centers meet the benchmark criteria, and we'll talk about those 13. And then there's also statistics in here about the size, as shown in the table here, the size of the communication centers and where each of them falls. I mentioned the benchmark criteria. I did include that here in the slide deck. This is MCP's criteria. They have both a category 1 and a category 2 criteria, which are shown here. And their benchmark for regionalization was if any dispatch center had 6 or more category 1 attributes, or a combination of category 1 and 2 attributes that exceeded 8. So that's, and there's a table in the plan in one of the appendices that shows each of the dispatch centers and how they fall with regards to each of these criteria. So that's where they came up with their benchmark. I think we had talked about this last time in terms of kind of a process, and the tier 1 options. Again, this is a review of the tier 1 options, and the next slide actually describes them a little bit more. But first, a quick overview. So option 1 regionalizes 12 dispatch centers. So maintains the current 6 PSAPs, the 2 managed by the state and the 4 regional, and it regionalizes 12 dispatch centers. Now, the 12 comes from the previous slide mentions that 13 meet their criteria, but of those 13, one of them was the University of Vermont, which they do not recommend regionalizing based on what they refer to as special requirements. So that's where the 12 comes out of the 13. Option 2 had was an adjustment in the PSAPs and switched from 4 regional and 2 managed by the state to 4 managed by the state by opening the 2 previous PSAPs that were closed, Derby and Rutland, and reducing the regional PSAPs to 2. And it also looked at regionalizing existing or additional dispatch centers. And I have those listed in the next slide. Option 3 does not regionalize any further dispatch centers, so keeps the same number as option 2, but it does maintain the same 6 PSAPs that we have today. So the difference between option 2 and option 3 is actually the PSAP configuration, where 3 is the same as today, and option 2 reopens the 2 that were previously closed. Option 4 uses maintains the 6 PSAPs, but essentially regionalizes all individual dispatch centers with the exception of the 2 listed there, Mad River Valley Ambulance and University of Vermont, due to what MCP calls their special requirements. And here it says that although dispatch centers would be regionalized unless self-funded and subject to the state policy, as we discussed before.
Is that the model where we had talked before about, to use Hartford as an example, even though there might be a PSAP at Hartford, essentially Hartford would just be like the landlord, and the dispatch function and the employees there would be employees of the state. Is that where option? Do you remember what I'm talking about? Where
I'm trying to remember where we talked about. I think that might apply for option 5.
Okay.
Paul, correct me if I'm wrong, because there's additional PSAPs in operation option 5. Option 5 moves to what MCP refers to as the county PSAP model, although they indicate 8 PSAPs as opposed to, of course, there's 14 counties. I asked MCP for clarification on that, and they are researching that, but I don't have the answer as of today.
Yeah, I think that some of the counties are just so small that it doesn't make sense for them to be on their own. Like, for example, Grand Isle would
most likely, yes, but
Grand Isle normally falls in with Franklin, for example.
Right. Yeah, I don't know how they have it configured. I didn't see that in the plan, and maybe they are leaving that up to the governance board or some other step where they would identify where those 8 where they reside and what counties they cover.
Because when looking at option 4, where it says no regional PSAPs, e.g. operational state management.
Oh, yeah, you're correct. There's that option does refer to 6 PSAPs, but no regional. You're right. So they are all state Roman PSAPs. Okay.
I think what we had talked about was that they could stay in their current physical locations, but they would no longer be under the control of the entity.
That's right. Yes. Yeah.
So
You
like,
know how that's going to go over in the real
Yeah.
world.
So
That
like,
is
yeah.
not going to fly.
So like we're going to tell St. Albans PD, like, okay, we're still going to operate a PSAP here, but it's going to be run by the state. The employees are going to work for the state. You're just going to be the landlord. And yeah,
I can hear the reaction as we speak, as we're talking.
Right.
And I'll go back, not to beat a dead horse or anything, but I think any reference to PSAPs should be removed from
Right.
these recommendations. So, for example, in option 1, it could say regionalize 12 dispatch centers.
Mhm.
And then once dispatch has figured itself out, if there are changes that need to be made in the location of PSAPs, that could be brought to the 911 board as a recommendation, or perhaps it would happen organically, right?
Right.
If centers are regionalizing, then we might have to make those decisions. I really think it muddies the water to continue to talk about the 911 function here. We're here to address efficiencies in the dispatch function. Unless someone can make an argument, if you will, to me that like we had talked about the 2 PSAP option 2, I guess that's where I'm going now. Make an argument to me on how such a plan does advance the dispatch function, but to just focus on where 911 calls are delivered is, as I've said before, outside the scope of this group. So anyway, I just kind of wanted to clarify, because I shut this conversation down a lot, I feel, and that considering going to a 2 PSAP model or reorganizing PSAPs as outlined in here does not address the work of the task force, in my view. So I would need to hear an argument why it does, I guess, is in order to enjoy the conversation more. So anyway, my 2 cents. And definitely we need Michael Wright here to continue this because he has some strong feelings on that too. So
Barb,
if we were to, all right, go ahead, Rick.
yeah, so Barb, I really appreciate what you're saying there, and I think that's guidance we really haven't, kind of indicated that we need to focus away from. So I think that matters. However, how do we address and should we be addressing situations or if there is an existing PSAP and we can certainly name at least one that might consider not wanting to be a PSAP any longer.
Right.
Is that something that a recommendation, if that happens, should come out of this working group, or is that again off limits because that really would be managed by the E911 board?
well, if there was a recommendation from this group to close or regionalize an existing center that serves as a PSAP, the center would have to accept that, right?
Yes.
Or continue to operate without state funding. And then if that center agreed that yes, we should regionalize, they would then, according to our MOU, come to the 911 board and say,
Right.
This is what we're doing. And the 911 board would respond, right? So maybe it would be working with the new regionalized center that their services are going to be a part of to become a PSAP. But it's sort of like we would have, in my view, we would have the discussion about who's going to end up being a PSAP after
Right.
The regionalization arrangements had been made. So, and the board has supported that in the past. When Chittenden County was working on its regionalization, they kept the 911 board informed of what they were doing. They wanted to be a PSAP, and the board said, we will consider making you a PSAP once you're up and operational. So it was no guarantee, right? But we were open to the conversation. And in that particular case, they had some really strong call volume data where it would make sense for them to become a PSAP. Presumably, though, if you regionalized enough of the centers, including ones that might be acting as PSAPs now, that same argument could be made. So,
right. To your point, Barbara, I think this is something that we throughout the whole process have struggled to get MCP to make a distinction on. But I think if wherever the term PSAP appears in this table, it should just be replaced with RCC, Regional Communication Center.
Right. Right.
And then once the dust settles, the 911 board will decide which of those RCCs, maybe all of them, maybe not all of them, will become or will continue to be PSAPs.
Right. I think that's the best approach. And certainly the board would be open, I'm sure, to recommendations from this or a successor group after the dust has settled.
Right.
So Paul, I really like what you just said, Regional Communications Center, because we kind of bounce back and forth between dispatch center, communication center. Sometimes it's capitalized, sometimes it isn't.
Yeah, right.
But I think standardizing on what we're referring to the dispatch centers or regional communication center, I think will make is important because it now it's a level playing ground. All our existing dispatch centers are regional communication centers, and so I don't know. I just like that terminology better, instead of it being one or the other. I don't know what you all think, but we kind of bounce back and forth on which, I mean, I know I write it a lot. I'm thinking, well, should I call it a dispatch center or a communication center? Or I like that terminology, regional communication centers.
Yep, I do too.
So, Tom, may I ask you on option 1 and option 2, which is the same? Yeah, and option 3, which is the same. No, I know they're not the same, but what's the same about them is the limited dispatch center model or the 12 dispatch center. Did MCP provide a map? I went back and looked, but I didn't see.
Yes, they did provide a map, and maybe this will help. I don't have the map in here. The map was a little hard to read because it had dispatch centers grayed out or blacked out that were regionalized, so it was hard to tell which one they were talking about. This is my summary of the kind of a different way to look at those options. But if I could, before we move on to this, per Barb's suggestion, if we ignore changes to the PSAPs, I would think that reduces this table to 3 options. Would be essentially option 1, which is regionalizing 12 dispatch centers. It would include option 3, which is regionalizing regionalizing an additional 6 dispatch centers, but still having the same 6 PSAPs. And it would include option 4, where the 6 PSAPs would essentially remain the same, but then there's no dispatch only centers.
That would be like recommending that every existing dispatch center close and all of the communications functions go out of the 6 existing.
Option 4 is right. So so with your criteria, Barb, without messing with the PSAPs, if you will, I think that eliminates option 2 and option 5 essentially. Unless we want to reconfigure them.
Unless a recommendation, like if you look at option 2, it says reopen the 2 previous state PSAPs. So if you change that to reopen the 2 previous state dispatch centers, because the task force thinks that reopening Derby and Rutland would serve the dispatch function well, across, you know,
Right,
as part of this
right.
whole plan, that they open them as dispatch centers, right? And then
right.
again, maybe the board would say, oh, well, maybe they want to be PSAPs too, in addition, right? But
Yeah.
it preserves that relationship we have had with the various entities, right? That gives us geographic and agency diversity and all the things that we value. So, but if a decision was made to reopen the two state centers for dispatch purposes, or even option 5, reopen or not reopen, but arrange the regional communication centers by county for the purposes of dispatching, then perhaps the 911 board would come in after the fact and say, okay, well, this makes sense. Let's make 8 of them PSAPs or something. You know, I don't know what the decision would be, but
Right.
we would have established what the dispatch landscape looks like.
Right.
Right.
Okay. I see.
Of course, that we haven't addressed. There might be an option 6 or 7. You know, that the working group creates on its own. You know,
Right. Well, yeah,
we
there are. Yeah, we
yeah.
certainly asked the question of, you know, are there other options? Um, but with a little more detail, this is how I saw it going through each of those options. So option 1 reduces the number of in-state dispatch centers from 25 to 13. So essentially eliminates 12, and the 12 are listed there. And those are 12 out of the 13 that meet MCP's benchmark criteria. The 13th being University of Vermont, which they still recommend to stay open. So from that step, option 2, if we just look at the dispatch side, remember there was a PSAP function to option 2, a PSAP component. But if we just look at the dispatch side, it recommends reducing 6 more centers. And actually, there's a little confusion here in the document. In some places, it says 5, but when I look at the criteria, it appears to be 6. So I have a question to MCP on that, and I'm waiting for clarification. But these would be the 6 listed there that would be further reduced.
But in addition to closing those 6 additional dispatch centers, option 2 also proposes to reopen Rutland and Derby and force 2 of the existing RCCs to close. Right?
Correct. But here I was just kind of addressing the dispatch side of
For
it.
consolidation purposes, right? Okay.
Yeah. Right. Then again, option 3 doesn't recommend any further reduction. But then option 4 does. Option 4 takes the step of eliminating all dispatch centers with the exception of these 2, Mad River and University of Vermont. And I'm sorry, Paul, do you have a question?
Well, I'm just thinking that with option 2, so not to keep going back to that, but with option 2, it's closing 6 more, but it's actually opening 2, adding 2 more, because Derby and Rutland would, under this, assuming that Derby and Rutland would be the locations, it's proposing to open 2 more state.
That's true, but
RCC,
option two also recommended eliminating 2 of the regional PSAPs.
Yeah.
So it still had 6 PSAPs.
Okay. Right,
Yeah,
but thinking of them as yes, there might be a PSAP, but as a dispatch center. Derby and Rutland currently are not dispatch centers, and if we reopen them, we're actually adding 2 more to the list.
Right.
And two of the current local RCCs, you know, Hartford, Shelburne, St. Albans, and Lamoille County, they're saying to close them, but those are to close 2 of them, but those are pretty big centers to talk about closing.
Right.
Right. That already have sort of a regional footprint, right? Yeah. Yeah. And option 4, I know I'm jumping around a little bit here. makes a lot of assumptions, and Shelburne Town Manager brought this up to us, right? That the existing 6 PSAPs would want to participate in this and become, expand essentially their dispatch role. We don't know that there's any buy-in from that. We don't know where Department of Public Safety stands on expanding their dispatch role, right? Because presumably they would have to.
Right.
Right.
I
If you remember, I'm skipping ahead a little bit here, but there were 3 separate implementation potentials recommended for option 4. Version 4A was essentially based on doing the regionalization based on existing PSAP catchment areas, and that would change, as you suggest, Barb, there would be additional activity picked up by those current PSAPs. So it shows here Westminster would pick up 15 dispatch center customers, if you will, or 88 agencies, 90,000 incidents, and Williston would similarly pick up 128 agencies. And then there was this table 4B would be based on closest PSAP. And I think this table created a lot of discussion when it was first published, right? This shows how the agencies that are currently dispatched by another dispatch center, how they would fall into the 6 PSAP only model. So you'll see the third column over there is the additional agencies that would be picked up by each of these 6 PSAPs.
And somewhere there must be cost estimates for all of this.
Yes, this addressed the cost savings.
Okay.
This portion, and there's the 5 columns here associated with the 5 options.
Right. And of course, this is assuming that all of those agencies that currently get their dispatching from out of state are all going to come back home and fall into one of these nice, neat 6 little pools.
Yes.
Which is not
and here there's a little discrepancy again, because this is option 1. Here it says reduction of 11 dispatch centers, but I think it's actually 12.
Right.
And then the staff that goes along with that. So that shows a savings of roughly 2 million. Then the additional 6 that occur from option 2 shows an additional almost 1.4 million in potential savings. 3 just kept the number of dispatch centers the same as in 2, so there's no additional change. And then 4 was closing the remaining dispatch centers. So reduction of further staff.
Right, but where is the so the corresponding increase of staff in a regionalized or expanded center has got to be accounted for in this calculation, right? I mean, I don't know. I got to get my
I believe it is. I don't think the detailing's here, but I believe that
right.
it is.
Well, it must be, right? So if you're gonna add $150,000 incidents to Williston's workload, you're going to need more people. So it must be, though, that that's accounted for in these calculations. So.
There's also on the flip side of it is where are the revenues from the towns going to, or if they get consolidated, that means that the revenues from each of the towns that are regionalized and that are now sent to a a PSAP or a regional communications center,
A fiscal agent, right?
yeah, the fiscal responsibility behind that has to be assessed.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, that's a huge piece that I don't think is described here.
No,
How exactly does that happen? Is there, a fiscal agent under the governance board that, collects all the revenue and then redistributes?
That's a working group that
I-
hasn't met yet, right?
right,
Right.
right. Okay, let me see. Where do we go? From here, we talked about option 4 has 3 potential variations. One being regionalizing based on PSAP catchment area. Another being regionalized based on geographically closest PSAP. That would create these changes in the volume for each of these PSAPs. And then there was a 4C, which would be by choice. Dispatch center, which had the autonomy to choose from among the 6 PSAPs with which to regionalize, allowing them to align with PSAP that best fits their operational needs. And this indicates here localities currently served by out-of-state dispatch centers would be given the option to potentially remain or regionalize with a Vermont agency.
I don't know. I still feel it's kind of arbitrary to identify the 6 PSAPs as the appropriate entities for an option like this, right? First of all, we don't know if we have their buy-in, which is huge. And maybe as
You mean due to the increase in volume?
yeah, yeah. And my other point was if the task force were to encourage like organic, is that the word I want? Yeah, organic
Yeah.
regionalization. So sort of voluntary figuring out of this is how I view that. Perhaps there would be new RCCs created that would better serve these roles, right? I don't think there's, I guess, I don't think there's anything magical about the 6 existing PSAPs. So maybe they just used it as a placeholder, something that's in place now that they could at least propose this from. But
Right.
again, if these didn't want to serve in this role or wanted to regionalize for some other reason, you could end up with different entities at the end of the day. But I'm kind of going into the organic, inorganic thing where I'm pretty firm that this can't be a forced thing because,
Right.
and on the other hand, maybe it has to be a forced thing. I don't know. you know,
Well, I think if the force comes in the form of taxation, for lack of a better term, if every municipality is required by some new law to contribute financially to this new governing body,
right.
we're kind of forcing them that way. I mean, if
Yeah.
they're going to have to pay for it, they might as well take advantage of it and get the service from it.
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, I didn't mean to sidetrack us, but
No, that's all right.
I have a follow-up question there too. So how then would the board, the future public safety communication board, have the authorization to require or to recommend a center, regional communication center, discontinue? I mean, you don't really have that authorization, or with that authorization, that doesn't need to be part of it because we have, you either can join us, and if you join us, there's going to be X, Y, and Z benefits. And if you don't join us, you still have to follow the standards and procedures and certification requirements, but you are, are you not going to get funded to do that? Or, I mean, I'm just behind this is what are the mechanics of even achieving any changes? Because right
Right.
now, there is no one says that you can be a regional communication center or you can't be a regional communication center. So, what we need to address, or at least have a discussion on how that would be, what authorization the future board might have on that.
Well, I kind of picture the future board having a pot of money that comes from, I don't know, the end of the rainbow or something. I don't know where it comes from, who could encourage regionalization and use that money as incentive to do so.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Well, maybe we're, getting into the
Yeah, we're
funding
getting into the
portion of
weeds.
it, but they've got to have money somewhere, coming from somewhere, right? So a big part of the goals of the task force is to make it equitable, right? So either every town has to pay something based on some metric, or all the money's got to come from the state and the towns pay nothing, right? There's
Right.
there's
Nobody pays anything. Right.
right, either nobody pays or everybody pays something.
Right.
Well, the legislature's not going to support that because that means
Oh,
that
absolutely, yeah.
funds
Well,
that
either way, they're going to have to support it, right?
yeah, funds that are currently being paid, not being no longer not being any longer available, would kind of just redirect the spending to, the funding to the state. And the state doesn't want to take on those additional costs that are already being covered by the local jurisdiction. So I don't see that model being achievable, where the state pays for everything and no one else is paying. But it's possible. I mean, you could put a fee on that for their services, but it couldn't exceed anything they're paying now. And remember, a number of towns aren't paying. As
Right,
Chris pointed
right. A
out
lot of towns.
previously, he's has his own funding challenges to keep his centers up and running.
Right.
In terms of the slides or resources I have for further discussion, I have the strengths and then the challenges identified for each of the options as MCP had described them. So we could review those to see, the benefits.
I'm not sure that when at the end of wherever the end is, when we get to the end, I'm not sure that we're actually going to fall nice and neatly into any of MCP's 5 options. But
Right.
like Rick said before, I think it may be option 6 or option 7 or something else.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was thinking based on the discussion.
Yeah.
And Barb's assessment of the, we shouldn't be recommending changes to the PSAPs in any of these options. So do these have to be restated to be consistent with that criteria? Do we need to try and restate these or eliminate one or more of them?
I think maybe if we focused on the term that Paul used, the regional communication centers, and removed PSAPs from here, maybe there's a footnote that says, PSAP configuration would be an ongoing conversation as blah, blah, as these regional centers are stood up or whatever. So option 1 would change from what it says now to regionalize 12 dispatch centers.
Okay.
although they are mentioning have the state PSEPs as a separate division of emergency communications, not under VSP. That also feels a little bit, I mean, I think there's real benefit to that,
But is it
but it
outside the scope?
also feels outside of scope.
Well, but the PSAPs do dispatch as well, of course.
Right. Right.
So from that perspective, it could be within scope of the task force.
Right.
And also keep in mind that those towns that are affiliated, working through an out-of-state center, they
They don't
seem
pay
to,
for dispatch.
pardon?
They don't pay for dispatch.
Well, if they have a relationship with an out-of-state PSAP or just communications center,
Oh, you said
they're,
out of state.
yeah, out of state.
Oh, okay. I'm
Yeah,
sorry. Yeah,
yeah,
I'm wrong then.
yeah.
No.
So they seem to be able to maintain through this model to maintain their existing relationships. Although I only see it stated in option 5, out-of-state dispatch centers may retain their current dispatch clients.
Right. Although we did see that description in one of the option 4 implementation scenarios as well.
Yeah.
You know, what if we didn't recommend any physical regionalization?
I was
You
going
know?
to suggest that's certainly an option, right? That's an option 0, if you will. That's an option.
It might allow
It would
more
provide
robust
organic
conversation on it.
opportunity.
Yeah, yeah,
Well, right.
and it
If we take whatever actions we end up taking, we do it with the goal of encouraging additional organic regionalization.
and we could also come at it from the things that the other working groups are working on, right? Like the standardization of policies and
Absolutely.
procedures, maybe
Absolutely.
is a type of regionalization, right?
Right.
But it might be less threatening too, and therefore might encourage people to listen more open-mindedly.
Yeah, I certainly think that's an option. The thing that potentially we miss not doing any type of regionalization is this is our greatest opportunity for cost savings.
Right.
Okay, right. I mean, the other forms of regionalization certainly would benefit dispatch in terms of common procedures, policies, having a statewide CAD. But those those include costs and not a large opportunity for cost savings.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we don't want to close the door on any physical consolidation, or
Right.
we want to put things in motion that would encourage it, but I don't know that we want to necessarily identify in advance what it has to look like.
Right.
And maybe depending.
And
Oh, go ahead, Dom. Go ahead.
well, I was just going to say, and the encouragement is most likely going to be financial, right? And there has to be some financial change in how dispatch is funded in order to make things equitable. So we know we've got to have some type of model that makes it equitable, right? So there's certainly going to be a change. So for those that are dispatched today by Westminster or Williston, they're not paying anything currently, but I don't see that continuing if there's going to be an equitable, some type of equitable model.
And that takes me right back to, okay, so each town has to pay some amount based on some formula that we come up with, and that money
Right.
goes to the fiscal agent and then gets distributed back out to the existing centers, which
Right. So the center is, so then if there's some consolidation, centers pick up more towns to dispatch, then they would get more funding,
Right.
right?
Right.
So trying to, playing devil's advocate here, um, by maintaining the status quo, we really aren't saving any funds. I mean, all the operation costs kind of remain the same, and so through consolidation, there is MCP's report says that there are savings that can be achieved, and so I think yes, it's a very difficult position to take to provide recommendations that centers should consolidate where in their best interest because they can save funds if that is in fact the case. But I'm concerned that if we maintain the status quo without making some firm recommendations, hopefully it'll happen organically. I mean, there are 24 non-24-hour operations, Dover, Middleburg, Randolph, and Wilmington, and so they're also transferring their after hours calls to the whatever center they have made arrangements with. But I think if we're going to establish some standards, we also have to, make, I think, really firm recommendations on here's the benefits of consolidating, and maybe offer a few options because I'm concerned that if we don't do anything, that we're not saving any money.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's something that we would certainly miss the major benefit of regionalization.
Yeah,
But
but if we
is there
do,
an opportunity to save some funding just by, in one of the other tiers, um, which one was, I guess it was tier three, we talked about staffing and potentially having shared staffing, without physically regionalizing dispatch centers, there still may be opportunity to have shared staffing where certain regions, certain groups of dispatch centers could have access to resources for when they have, when they need additional staff, when they have busy times or when they have some going to training. So there would be potentially fewer part-time uh, staff on hand throughout the state, but they would be shared regionally, for example. There may be an opportunity for some savings with that approach.
it's a double-edged sword because we don't want to be Big Brother and say you
Yeah,
don't meet the qualifications to maintain the consistent operation support that your citizens deserve. But who are we to tell them? And then this becomes then we get into a point where we could go spend a lot of time with this effort and change nothing, and
Hmm.
that don't feel good. But that's the safer approach. I mean, local control in Vermont is kind of same as and that's the maple leaf of Vermont politics. I mean, that's what everyone has, even though we recognize the flaws in it, potentially, it's very difficult for us to then weigh in and say, well, based on our criteria and the standards that we're establishing, it is a high probability that your regional communication center doesn't meet the standards. But you can maintain operations if you want to. However, you wouldn't have access to what X, Y, and Z benefits,
Hmm.
funding. I mean,
Right.
yeah, the carrot and the stick, it becomes very difficult. I mean, that's obviously this is the first time this has been done, so it's been done before, but having a public safety communications board mandating or penalizing you if you don't, so to speak, it's really difficult. It's difficult. But if we don't do anything, then have we achieved and objective. I mean, the Act 78, has some, obviously has some language discussing, that, discussing our requirement to look at this.
Right. The whole conversation is bringing me back to what are we trying to solve, right?
Yeah.
So I think the equity issue is key for one thing, right?
Yep.
Who's paying what?
Right.
And ensuring, I'm thinking now of the Vermont League and Cities and Towns work that we have to do to find the needs assessment, right, of where the gaps are, who needs service, and that's maybe more what we're trying to solve, that people are paying equitably and getting equitable service, versus having to physically reduce the number of centers. Anyway, I'm not sure that made sense. But what are we trying to solve? I don't think in and of itself the number of dispatch centers matters to equitable delivery of service and payment,
Well, if we, Dom, can you please go back to slide? Hold on, I'm looking my other computer. I got the presentation up. To slide 8, please. Okay, so this is the criteria under which MCP read the benchmarks they've established. And,
right?
So they're making their recommendations based on this criteria. And
Right, but there's also goals that they state as to what they're trying to, what they're trying to accomplish.
Right. But I look at this, the average call per variable exceeds $40 a call. If a center is paying more than, a normal, fee, that's not to their benefit as well. That it costs them more to process a call. So, and if they have less than the recommended number of dispatchers on staff, then that also creates a potential jeopardy in the event that they have a larger scale incident that puts an overload on their existing staff. So,
right.
I think back, when we look at the criteria under which the benchmarks established by them, there's some good information here that might be I think a dispatch center might benefit by understanding where they stand relative to where others are. If they're paying more than others are paying, and why. Maybe that becomes part of an ongoing effort at the Public Safety Communication Board level to educate, as you said earlier, Barb, and not force them, but to show them that your operating costs are higher, and if by doing X, Y, and Z, you could reduce your cost. But,
right.
I think Paul, you may have said earlier, or either one of you said that, let it be, but let the board educate folks as to the benefits of doing that and give them some more guidance. But I don't know. I'm going to borrow what you said earlier, Barb. I think I'm making sense.
No, yeah, I know. It made sense to me. So maybe those two thoughts kind of go hand in hand, right? So my thought was, what if we don't do anything with physical regionalization? And then Rick's thought on top of that is more like, let's do an education piece of why this would be beneficial to you and your constituents to consider regionalization.
Because we spent a great deal of time and effort putting together an inventory, and the findings of the inventory, can be and should be leveraged to educate the community. Because where these reports were published, they were redacted heavily, so they may not get all that, or they're busy. They're not, they're leaving it up to us to to the task force to assess the information and come back and make recommendations of benefit to them. And perhaps before we go directly to the legislature, maybe we also should engage some of these regional communication centers as to what we found, and to get some of their feedback, so that we haven't done an end run around them. We have taken the information and we've used that to go back and have some conversations, so that we don't go to the legislature and say, yeah, here's what we recommend, and say, well, did you talk to any of those centers? Well,
Right.
well, no, our consultant did, and I don't, I don't think that's, I don't subscribe we bypass that without having some direct conversations with some of these centers that could be impacted.
Right.
I'm not going to say underperforming, quote unquote, underperforming, but not achieving a more fiscally responsible approach, or I don't know what the language is, but I don't want them to say anything that you guys aren't performing. But
Right,
here's where you
no.
stand relative to where others are, and could be opportunities for you to consolidate, inorganically, that would still reduce your operating costs and ideally improve your the end services that are offered. And then, of course, when you say that, someone will say, "No, I'm not going to work with that group. I don't. Those people have done this to me." And I mean, the normal people behavior is going to come out whenever you have these conversations. You don't go in unprepared.
Yeah.
Right. The recommendations none of the recommendations include, like, let's take these centers that are meeting or not meeting, whatever the right word is, these criteria and are good candidates for regionalization, and let's stand up a new regional center that serves all of those people. They're automatically, I think, distributing those dispatch services to to the 6 PSAPs, right? I mean, so there's still, like, I'm thinking of Addison County, because one of the recommendations somewhere was to close, I think, Rutland City, right? And that made me think of that area, the southwest area of the state, and how they are already lacking in dispatch services, right? That's why Ruth Hardy was a champion of this, because her constituents weren't being
Rutland
well
City
served.
is in the first wave.
as well as Manchester.
Right.
Mhm.
And so maybe there's
Middlebury.
an argument.
Yeah.
And where?
And Middlebury.
Middlebury.
So
Right.
that whole southwest quadrant of the state is being shut down. Middlebury, Rutland, and Manchester.
For dispatch, and presumably would move those services, I'm going to guess, to Westminster.
Well, one of the options showed them going to Hartford, and I remember somebody from Rutland complaining about that.
Yeah. So I don't know. I think there's a lot more discussion that needs to happen on that. And didn't we have some entities in that area that were interested in becoming regional centers?
Well,
I don't.
Mike Dunges has told us that Rutland City wants to be.
Right.
So this
Yeah.
conversation is it just dawned on me that one of the things that we're not at all doing here is that we're not saying, well, these centers are again, are operating below a reasonable standard that's been established as we assessed all of the centers. And in order for them to raise their bar, here's what would have to happen to them. And so we are looking at only consolidating them and we're not giving any recommendation as to here's what would improve their status standards, and so I think just because that came to my mind as you were talking, maybe that's something that we should also consider. What improvements, enhancements, and at what cost would need to happen at certain these to bring them up to an equal standard with some of their um, some of their fellow centers.
Right.
So we're getting kind of short on time. I just wanted to get something out before we run out of time. I've been kind of thinking of this in like a parallel to the 911 board. So I don't know what to, we're talking about establishing this new communications board parallel to the 911 board. If you look at the 911 side, the 911 board collects funds from wherever they come from, and then they decide who they're going to select to deliver those services. If you do the same thing on the communications side, the communications board is going to gather these funds, presumably from some form of county tax or property tax or wherever it comes from, and they will decide who's going to deliver these services. So I'm thinking, in my mind, I'm thinking, okay, we set a date, so as of January 1st, 2030, all municipalities are going to start contributing into this fund, and all expenses associated with dispatch will now fall to this new communications board. And initially, the board is going to fund all 37 dispatch centers, but if we set certain dates along the way, whereas different benchmarks are going to be imposed and sort of slowly tighten the noose, okay, so as of day one, we're going to fund all 37, but you 2-year warning, we're going to start implementing, you must provide 24-hour coverage. 2 years later, we're going to implement that you must have minimum staffing. 2 years later, we're going to implement that you must have, whatever those different benchmarks were.
The policies and procedures, they have to follow policies and procedures developed by the board.
So over the course of a decade, as we keep adding benchmarks to the list of criteria that they have to meet in order to receive that funding, we're going to sort of force them to organically pick a dispatch center and consolidate.
Pick a dispatch center and consolidate, or get better.
Or
right?
get better.
Or upgrade. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Well, I like a start date that's 10 years further out, and so that we're all of us probably likely to be retired. But it was good to hear that kind of laid out. I mean, that made good sense to me, and
that does make sense.
Yeah, and it kind of combines all the things we've talked about organic and equity and all of that.
Well, it takes off from our shoulders the idea of deciding who it's going to be. It's going to be Hartford, it's going to be St. Albans, it's going to be Spring or Shelburne, or no, over time they can decide, okay, I think my agency is up to the task. I'm going to meet all of these benchmarks and I want to be one of those RCCs. Or they could decide, boy, that seems like a lot of work. I'd rather just, let some other center provide our services. We're going to pay the same regardless.
Right.
That's
interesting.
Really a good strategy. However, I don't. For me, what is the missing pieces? What is it that we're giving them, and where does that funding come from that we could, use that as the carrot and the stick, so to speak? Because one of the things you did mention, Paul, is that they wouldn't, they would receive funding, but I'm not sure what that is. But I think I like that approach. I mean, here are standards and here's implementation schedule for you to achieve those, or you would lose whatever that is you're going to lose.
Right. I think that whatever working group is working on funding is going to have to come up with the matrix or the algorithm or whatever whether it's based on population or grand list or call volume or whatever it is. We need to come up with a formula that every community is going to pay based on, and give them several years notice so that they can start building it into their budget, and start accumulating those funds so that this new communications board has the money necessary to be responsible for all dispatch expenses statewide.
Good thing you're on the funding working group, Paul.
Yeah.
Oh, thank goodness.
I
Yeah.
thought this was my last.
Well, maybe the funding could be from those towns that don't pay for dispatch services. They have to put a
Right.
fee up, and
Right.
maybe that becomes part of the. Not that I want to go bang on their door and say, well, by the way, for you're not paying for dispatch services, and so here's your fees. You're gonna have to pay, and that could be part of the pool.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of like back, I don't remember if it was this working group, this task force, or the prior group, but Kim Cheney kept hitting us over the head with, it's kind of like education. If you could look back
Right.
at the 60s with when the state implemented education funding formulas, we're kind of in the same boat where we need to come up with a formula, whereas it's equitable, but is it based on, is it so that the wealthier towns aren't paying disproportionately to the
and formulas do exist,
right?
right? Lamoille County has a
Yes.
formula,
Right.
and Capital Fire has a formula for their members.
Based so much on population, so much on grand
Yeah.
list. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's, Elizabeth, tell them take an action item to look at some of those formulas and just make sure that we can present some of them. We have to look at them and document them a little further. We are down to 9 minutes. I don't know if we want to go to the agenda and then do our public comment before we break.
Yeah, I think I'm going to give an opportunity for, I think Chris is the only member of the public today. Chris, do you have thoughts to share?
Yeah, thanks, Barb. I'm probably in the same
solution.
Oh, can you hear me?
A solution for us?
Oh, of course I have a solution.
Yeah.
Had that yet. No, I'm probably in the same boat as I was last time. It's, there's a lot of great conversation. There's probably a 1,000 different thoughts that I have. That again, I don't want to take up too much time. I think my general, takeaway at the end of all of this is, regardless of if any major changes are ever made at the end of the day, I think a good goal is simply to have a more robust and efficient communication system in the state. And part of that, of course, is a lot of folks, that are not paying probably should be paying their fair share. And I think that's a problem that you all discussed at length. I think that's going to be a big, I won't say a problem, but a big discussion, a lot bigger than we can have here. But I think there was talk about cost savings and this and that, and you may very well find at the end of all of this that there isn't necessarily a substantial cost savings or any cost savings for that matter, but you've still met the goal of creating a more robust and efficient system in the state, and I think that's a success. I think that is still a success. Yeah, I would argue that there might not be an incredible cost savings at the end of the day. You may even end up paying a few extra bucks here or there. So,
Right. I think that's a good point.
Yeah, but again, I have a lot of different thoughts, but I appreciate the giving me the microphone there for a minute. And the last thing I'll say is, and I brought it up in my notes, was, regarding 911, and I'm not trying to say one way or the other. I know the work of this group is predominantly or exclusively to focus on the dispatch side of things. But again, I just want to raise that if any changes were made to 911 in the sense of, let's say having one or two PSAPs and they're handling all the 911 calls, that inadvertently is going to impact all of the dispatch centers. And when I say impact, I don't necessarily mean negatively impact. I mean, now those dispatch centers have that potential of picking up other smaller entities. And that's where you could potentially do some of this consolidation. Again, I'm not even going to get into this whole regionalization because that's that's another conversation. But I think there's an opportunity here to do a good amount of consolidation. But I think that again, if there was going to ever be any discussion about changing the 911 structure, then that would kind of have to happen, in my opinion, more upfront, because that would automatically impact the capacity of all the dispatch centers that are out there. If you're saying that, no, we're never going to investigate that or look into that, and that's fine, then maybe, yeah, you're absolutely right. Just look at the entire dispatch environment might be the way to go. So again, just my 2 cents, and thanks again for giving me a moment.
Hey, Chris, just before you go off screen there, have you, you're not receiving any fees from the towns that you dispatch for, is that correct?
No, I don't know of any that are contributing to us. Could there be one? Maybe, but I don't know of any.
But you don't have a policy, a formula. Here's how you would. You don't have one because you're not collecting those fees.
Yeah, it would be a waste of time for us to develop a formula because we know what we're going to get.
Right.
we know the answer is zero. So that's what we go about. And, and obviously, as anything, you want to be able to help your local communities, and we do so as a state. We do so, and it's our obligation to do that right now. But there's no doubt that a system of fair and equitable has to be out there for all towns, and I know that's going to be a very hard pill to swallow.
Right.
To those, and I sympathize, of course, across the board. But I think from a DPS perspective, I mean, kind of hard to expect to receive this service indefinitely with no financial output. So, yeah, that's my thought.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks. Chris, you're welcome to send any thoughts along like you did last time if you want. And I appreciate you being at all these meetings, and speak up anytime so that you've got good thoughts. So
yeah, I think he's absolutely correct in that at the end of the day, we may not realize any significant cost savings. In fact, the costs might actually go up, but for that cost, we can hope to get a better system and a more equitably financed system.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
Right. That's a really good
almost
comment.
verbatim. We need to make that our mantra.
Yeah.
Like that.
Yes. Yes. Excellent. And I appreciate your comments too. I wanted to say on the impact to capacity at each center if the board were to consider changes to the 911 structure, because that's the kind of thing I think I was asking for in the beginning, is like, how would that benefit the dispatch function? And that's one of probably many different ways that it could impact one way or the other. So I appreciate you sharing that comment. Okay, so next steps, I don't think we're done. So
I can distribute what I have to each of you to make sure you have opportunity in between meetings if you want to review and give some extra thoughts. We haven't scheduled the next meeting.
No.
Right,
no,
we need to do that.
we do, and we don't have Michael. Should we just pick a date and hope, or should we do some outreach here?
And some polling.
Some polling. Yes. Let's do the polling this time, Elizabeth. So I think that might be the more efficient way.
Okay.
Do we try and target next week, Thursday, Friday, something like that? How's that work for the two of you?
I have some flexibility. Let's see. Wednesday afternoon would work well. It's like Thursday morning. Actually, most of Thursday is open at the moment.
Tuesday, Wednesday, I'm on the road, so I would my attendance would be unlikely. But after we get settled, Wednesday afternoon in North Carolina, my availability is pretty much wide open for the foreseeable future.
Okay.
All right.
Sounds like Thursday might be what we're zeroing in on.
Okay.
All right.
I think maybe we should have a couple of days for the poll. So do we want Thursday and Friday, or Thursday and the next Monday?
I would prefer Thursday and the next Monday.
All right.
Yeah, either one's fine with me.
All right. Let's do that, Elizabeth. Because I fear that if we just go one day, we're not going to have much luck.
Right. You could put Friday options on there just in case it's the only day that will work. And I'll just answer them as, whatever the option is, if need be or whatever.
Okay.
But it's definitely not
Right.
my preference.
Okay.
All right. Okay. So I think if there's nothing more, we can adjourn, right? How do we do it when we have two people, Paul? You motion, I second, we vote.
Right. I make the motion, we adjourn, and then you can second it.
I'll second that. All in favor of adjourning for today, raise your hand or indicate by saying aye. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We will, maybe Dom, could you reach out to Michael or at least let him know, he can go review the recording, or
Right.
I don't know if he'll automatically know where to find that. So.
When I send out the PowerPoint, I'll mention that.
Okay. All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Bob. Good luck today, by the way. Good luck.
Thank you. Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.